G'day there. Are you starting a new garden and you're getting a little overwhelmed trying to decide what exactly you want to grow? In this video we're going to talk about it, and stay tuned to find out the two most important considerations that you need to think about when you're deciding what plants to grow in your vegetable garden. The first thing you need to think about is, what are your goals growing a garden in your backyard or front yard? Are you looking for a quick food source, a long-term food source, high calories, high nutrition? Maybe some herbs for herbal remedies. Do you want it to look pretty with some flowers? Do you want to grow fruit trees? Do you need to build your soil? Do you need to add some shelter? The next thing you need to consider is, what is your climate? What is your backyard like? Is it really windy? Does it get a lot of sun? Does it not get enough sun? Does your climate have a lot of rain? Or is it really dry? How long is your growing season? And when is your first frost and your last frost? These ones you can often check out pretty easily by typing in your area and then typing in first frost or last frost on Google, and it will come up with an answer for you. Different plants will grow better in some environments and not others. So taking into consideration how long your growing season is and how hot and how cold it becomes quite important. For us, our growing season is relatively long, but it doesn't get very hot. So things like tomatoes and peppers and corn do better under plastic, so in a tunnel house or in a greenhouse. Alternatively, we can grow brassicas pretty much all winter long. I find planting a garden is all about balance. You want some fast, quick, easy crops, stuff that will be ready really soon. Radishes and lettuces are perfect. Usually within about a month, you'll have something coming out of the garden that you can be eating. And then you look at your high nutrition but sort of medium-term crops. So that's where your brassicas come in. So cabbages, broccoli, can't think what else, cauliflower, and then other things like beetroot and carrots. They all sort of take between 2 and 3 months before you're starting to get a decent harvest off of those. Peas and green beans also tend to fit in that category. And then there's the longer term but also higher calorie crops. So potatoes, sweet potatoes, pumpkin, winter squash, dried beans. They all take quite a bit longer. I think corn comes into that category as well. They take quite a bit longer to grow, but they are a lot higher in nutrition, a lot higher in calories, and they do tend to store quite well as well. There are some things that you can grow that will improve the soil. Cover crops keep the soil covered. They can help feed the microbiota in the soil. They take the sunlight, turn it into starch, and feed it out through their roots, making sure that those beneficial things in the soil are not passing away from starvation. And it helps protect the soil, keeps the topsoil where you need it to be, helps keep the moisture in, and all round does wonderful things. And once you've terminated your cover crops, you can use them as a mulch to break down. And ultimately, all of those things will mean you'll get a better harvest, because you've got better soil life, better moisture in the soil, so your plants will do better as well. Flowers and herbs, while you may not directly necessarily eat all of these, they do attract pollinators, which means you'll get more fruit, and they attract predators, so you'll have a lot less pest pressure as well. So once again, you'll get a lot better harvest. And then, do you have space to grow some perennial long-term plants? Asparagus, berries, strawberries, fruit trees, some of them perennial greens. These sorts of things you put in one garden bed and you leave them there long term. They do tend to provide food earlier in the season because they're not having to regrow every year, but also they tend to be sort of a long-term plant, like an apple tree, where their harvest will continue to increase year after year. They also tend to be lower effort plants to maintain them. They increase the amount of variety you can get out of your backyard, and they increase the resilience of your food system, because trees tend to be a lot more tolerant of varying seasonal changes and weird climate things that happen, and a lot of them will still give you fruit even if it's a particularly wet year or if it's a particularly hot year. Other things to consider are, how many people are you trying to feed? Someone with 2 people in their house will not need nearly as big a garden as what we do with 6 people in the house. How much space do you have to grow in? You are limited to how much space you have. You can, however, get a phenomenal amount of food out of a small space, especially if you put lots of nutrition in and also focus on growing vertically. What is your soil condition like? If you have really fertile, lush, soft, crumbly, nutrient-rich soil, you're going to be able to plant your plants closer together, and they're going to do a lot better than someone who's got dry, chalky, stony, no nutrients in it, sort of sandy soil. How much water do you have accessible to you? Can you use free water from the city? Do you have rainwater? Does it rain a lot where you are? Do you actually need to put in some kind of drainage system so that when it rains heavily it doesn't take out your gardens? These are all things that are worth considering, but the amount of food you can grow is directly limited by how much water you can give them. The microbiota in the soil must be kept moist or it will die, and when it dies your plants will struggle to get enough nutrients and they'll stop growing. Another thing is, how much time do you have to commit to this? I actually maintain our vegetable garden on an average of 1 to 2 hours a week. It doesn't have to take a lot of time once you've got your systems in place. And of course there are some weeks where I spend the whole day in the garden, and then there are some weeks where I just don't touch the garden other than to nip out and grab a few veggies for dinner. Now, the two most important things that I said you should listen out for, one of them is, what do you actually like to eat? There is 0 point in growing food that you don't want to eat. So for us, that means we don't grow beetroot because yuck, and we definitely don't grow Brussels sprouts because blah. And the second thing is, what grows well where you are. For us, we can't grow tomatoes and peppers and corn outside. So for us, I've bought a massive tunnel house, and that might be an option for where you are, but there's no way that it's worth me growing those outside at the moment. It's just not hot enough here for long enough, and they just don't fruit. Now, if you're not sure where to start with a list. Make a list of your favorite vegetables, and then make a list of what grows where you live. And then you can go through those things and work out which ones are on both lists, and that's a really good place to start. If you decide to grow from seed or start with seedlings or transplants, that is entirely up to you. Follow the directions on the pack and it'll tell you how to space them. You might be surprised at how many you can fit into a relatively small garden and how much food you can actually get out of a small space. If you want help trying to work out how many of each plant you can fit into your garden, I do use a program on the computer called Veggie Plotter, and I'll put a link to it down below. Into it you can put the size of your garden beds and then pick which vegetables you want to be growing and sort of drag and drop them across, and then it'll tell you how many you can fit in that garden area. It's quite helpful if you're new to gardening to be able to work it out using a tool like this without having to try and guess. So my tips for trying to decide what to grow in your garden: just give it a go. As long as you're growing something you like to eat, it's not going to go to waste when it comes ready to eat, right? Any food is going to be better than no food, and gardening is a lifelong learning journey. We're always improving. The weather is always changing. Some years are better than others, and it's okay if you have a bad year the first year. Consider it a life lesson and pull up your boots and give it a go again next year. Always be sure to plant way more than you think you need. This allows you, 1, to thin ruthlessly, and 2, to have abundant crops when other crops are not doing so well. And whatever you do, don't let that soil dry out. When the soil dries out, those little microbes and things, they all go off to sleep, and it can take weeks for them to wake up again. So it's really important that you can keep that soil nice and moist. It doesn't mean it needs to be soggy, but under that first inch of soil it should be damp. Just poke your finger in the ground, give it a wee poke, and see if it's nice and moist. If it feels dry under that top inch, make sure you give them a really good water. Mulch is a really effective way to help keep that moisture in and to stop that top layer of soil from creating that thick crust. Thank you for joining me today. I hope you found something useful, and if you want some more information on the top 3 survival crops that I would grow, check them out over here. I'll see you in the next one.